Hello everybody and welcome to the Coopersmith Crash Course on Information Literacy. This course is all about knowing how to gather information. Obviously that's a very important skill, especially in today's day and age, the quote-unquote information age, and we are going to look at some of the key points that are relevant from the textbook and from some of the articles that are listed in the syllabus regarding your reading material. The assessment for this course is a final examination, and it will contain multiple choice and open-ended or essay questions. And this course will be all about becoming a literate person in general. It's discussing sources in general, using the internet, using encyclopedias, using books, evaluating sources for their effectiveness, relevance, reliability, etc. This course is going to be very useful, hopefully in your ability to obtain and evaluate information in the future. First of all, what does information literacy mean? Well, we have a definition over here. The adoption of appropriate information or behavior to identify through whatever channel or medium information well fitted to information needs, leading to wise and ethical use of information in society. Now, that's a pretty broad definition with lots of different clauses. What this means is information literacy means is that you should have it's the ability to get the information that you need to make a determination whether the information is reliable, and of course determine how that information can be used in respect to a particular question you have or in respect to society in general. What kind of sources do you have available to you? Well, historically you only had traditional media. Traditional media means encyclopedias, newspapers, books, things like that. Today, of course, you have the internet, you have podcasts. Podcasts, of course, are information that are posted for public consumption. Very often you have educational podcasts, you have podcasts that are put up by colleges and universities. Web 2.0 tools, which means additional types of web tools that you can find on the World Wide Web. So first let us look at information gathering skills. How do you go about finding the information that you need, whether it be to become more educated or to solve a particular problem? Well, the first thing you need to do is to find the need or problem or question. What is it that you're searching for? Do you want to know more about the political system in Japan? Do you want to know more about the botany of various types of plants that live in the Amazon rainforest? Are you trying to make a determination of how you should invest your money? Are you trying to determine which candidate to vote for? Everything, every piece of information gathering, everything that information literacy is relevant to, starts with a question or a problem. It starts with the idea that you first have to define what it is that you're setting out to do. Because if you don't know what it is that you're setting out to do, it's going to be very difficult to actually do it. Then you need to find, locate, access, and retrieve the information from a variety of different sources. The information could be print, it could be electronic, or it could be human information, which means you interview other people, you talk to your friends. That's also an important component of information literacy. So we're talking about print, we're talking about electronic, and we're talking about through talking to individuals and listening to individuals even more importantly. Evaluating the information you get is the third step, critical step that's very often underutilized. We all know that you need to figure out what it is you're looking for. We all know that you need to find the information, but then you have to evaluate the information. Does it have credibility? Is it true? Does it have currency? Does it have reliability? Does it have validity? Is it appropriate? These are all things that you need to make a determination before you actually use the information. For example, if you're determining what to invest in and you find a website that says, invest in our company for reasons A, B, C, D, E, and F. Well, that might be good information, but on the other hand, you have to realize maybe they have an axe to grind. Maybe they're trying to get you to invest in their company, so it may be good information. You may be pretty clear on what it is you're trying to do, but on the other hand, you might have found a source that is biased and therefore maybe not completely reliable and appropriate in this case. Once you've evaluated the information, it's a matter of organizing it, putting it in the manner that it can be used to solve your information need, solve your problem, or answer whatever question you have. It could be organized physically by putting it into different documents. It could be organizing it in your mind, making a determination of, okay, well, I've got 6 pieces of information that say I should invest in this stock and 7 pieces of information in that stock, and try to organize it in order to continue the process of evaluating the information. And finally, communicate. Sometimes you might not need this last step. If you're just doing it for your own knowledge, of course, you don't have to communicate it. But sometimes you have to communicate the information legally and ethically using a variety of channels. If you're making a speech, for example, and you need to go and research it, then you'd use the first 4 to research and prepare your speech, and then you got to figure out how to communicate it. If you're writing a paper, if you're trying to make a presentation, trying to convince somebody to buy something, you have that last step of communication, which of course is critical. The next information literacy skill that I want to go into is the skill of problem solving. Problem solving means a systematic process to find a solution to a question or an issue, figuring out what it is that you need to do, and then going about and doing it. To do that, first thing you got to do, just like with research, the first thing is to define the problem. What is it that you're trying to solve? What is it that you're trying to do? Number 2, look for possible causes. What is it that's causing your problem? If the problem is that you have a stomachache, okay, is it because I ate too much last night? Is it because something I ate was bad? Is it because I'm dehydrated? And develop possible solutions. Maybe eat less or drink or figure out what possible solutions there might be. Evaluate each possible solution to determine the best one. Which one can I do now? Which one do I have access to? Which one is most likely to be effective? Which one is easiest? And then implement the best solution. This is kind of like experimentation almost from a science perspective. Do the actual solution that you came up with as the best. And then finally, evaluate the results of the implemented solution for future reference. And next, and again, these are all kind of independent components of information literacy, so we're going to go through these one at a time. The next is the issue of higher order thinking. Higher order thinking means thinking that is not just based on memorization, not just based on looking at something and knowing what it says. Higher order thinking contributes to both critical and creative thinking processes, and this is very often expressed in something called Bloom's taxonomy. Bloom's taxonomy has 6 levels, like this pyramid over here, which illustrates from the lowest level to the highest level of thinking. Now, that doesn't mean the lowest level is any less important than the highest level. On the contrary, you can see knowledge is the base for all other types of learning and all other types of information, using information. But as you go further up the pyramid over here, you have skills that build on the lower skills, but also are higher than just in understanding. Well, let's take a look at the 6 steps. First, you have knowledge. You have to gain the knowledge first. Everything is built on knowledge. If you don't know what's going on, well, then you have no chance of doing any of these other things. Second thing, once you have the information, that's fine, but can you comprehend it? Can you understand it? Just repeating the words is not good enough. You have to be able to understand it, or else you won't be able to use the information. Number 3, you have to apply it. Be able to take the information that you got and apply it to a particular situation that you're using. Say, okay, this is relevant to my situation. I learned that not drinking enough can lead to dehydration. I understand what that means. I understand that, that's a pretty simple example, but let's say, for example, if the knowledge is that not having enough electrolytes causes the body to be dehydrated. Comprehension is understanding that not having enough electrolytes means you're not drinking enough things with salt in it, and therefore that could cause a problem where your body doesn't have the electrolyte necessary to function properly. Application is when you're applying it to yourself. You're saying, okay, well, that means if I don't drink enough or I don't have enough electrolytes, I'm going to be in trouble. Then you have the analysis section. Analysis section is where you can take the information and draw conclusions from it. It's where you can just look deeper into the information and look at other impacts that it might have. Synthesis, as you get even higher, synthesis is when you take different types of information and put them together. You take various, like for example, you look at 2 different charts and get information from both charts and use those 2 pieces of information to draw a conclusion from. I know that I have knowledge and understanding and comprehension and application that not having enough sugar it weakens your energy, and not having enough salt weaken. You suffer with lack of electrolytes, and not having enough water dehydrates you. And if I take, let's say, so I might synthesize the idea that drinking something with sugar and salts and water in it would solve my dehydration problem. And finally, at the top of the pyramid over here, you have evaluation. Evaluation is when you look to something to make a determination whether it's a good piece of information or a poor piece of information. Other types of information include computer literacy, which means understanding how a computer works and how that can be applied to complete a task. That includes hardware, namely the computer machine itself, the hard drive, things like that. Software, which are programs that run on computers. The internet itself, multimedia like CDs, DVDs, things like that. Videos, file management, making sure that on your computer you have access to all the information that you're going to need and all the things that you're going to work with. And of course, security, to make sure that you're not vulnerable to hackers and that you don't leave the information in a way that people who should not see it will be able to see it. Library literacy means understanding how to use a library. Some of the areas of library literacy are books and periodicals like newspapers and magazines, databases and directories. Library directories, very often they're computerized these days, but have directories in terms of where you would find information on various subjects within a library. Catalogs and indexes, which also indicate where to find the information. Media resources. Again, today they're usually on the internet, but you can have them in a library too. And reference material, like encyclopedias, dictionaries, things like that. Types of literacy. Well, there's media literacy. That's understanding how to use the media to your own benefit. Media includes any group or person or paper or anything that tries to get news and information to the public. You're talking about the print media like newspapers, audiovisual and graphic media like TV and YouTube serial videos, people that put out podcasts consistently, websites that are web-based, things like the Drudge Report, Fox News, Yahoo News, Google News, Huffington Post, whatever, and understand the advantages, disadvantages, and challenges of each type of media. As we'll see later on, maybe the internet can get to you very fast and it can be posted very fast. That has one advantage, but on the other hand, it may not be vetted as much as, let's say, a newspaper article would be before it actually sees print, in the New York Times, let's say. Technology literacy includes the ability to find a variety of technology, to find, access, organize, and use information. This, in today's day and age, generally means the ability to use computer software and the internet itself, like the internet, search engines, computer software, like word processing programs, to get and organize and deliver information. Being literate, of course, information literate, having, a high degree of information literacy is, of course, extremely important for professionals in all different types of areas. Some examples: health professionals, doctors, nurses, etc., have to keep up with new procedures, medication, treatments, and diseases. How do they do that? Well, they could go back to continuing education classes constantly, or, as a supplement to that, they can go and try to find the information online or wherever it's available. Business professionals have to understand their competition, new ways to produce, new ways to service. Even construction workers need to keep up with new codes, materials, techniques. Same thing is true, of course, with electricians and whatnot. Changes in the rules, changes in the laws, changes in techniques, changes in the materials available. These things are constant. Social media analysts, of course, need to be well versed in the literacy that is relevant to social media and social media skills. Effective research, of course, has a variety of different requirements, but here are some examples of how you would go about trying to be the most effective researcher possible. First thing is, you need to define the need. If it's your own, then it's your own. If it's somebody else, of the audience in general. Finding the information, evaluating the information, organizing the information, and communicating. This we already discussed before. We briefly went into it a few minutes ago, but now what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at each step one by one. First, let's discuss defining the needs and the audience. Find out what information you actually need. If you're looking for information on whether a particular medicine works, well, you may not need necessarily the chemical structure of the medicine or the history of how the medicine was developed. The information that you need will be much more narrow in terms of its interaction with a particular disease that you're trying to cure. How much information will you need? Do you only need an overview, or are you trying to write a term paper on it, in which case you're obviously going to need a lot more information? Who's the audience? Is this just for myself, in which case you really don't need that much? Is it for other people? Is it for scientists? Is it for sitcom viewers? Is it for other colleagues? Is it for professionals? Is it for your supervisor? Is it for your underlings? Who is this for? This is an important first step in making sure that you know what you need to properly research the issue. Number two, find the information. And the first step to finding the information is creating a research strategy. Rather than just looking, Googling it. Well, Googling is certainly one attack, but beforehand, rather than just looking and finding whatever one thing leads to the next. I mean, sometimes personally, if I'm on Wikipedia and I'm researching something or anything, I just am poking around the internet, I could go from link to link to link for hours and not actually get the information that I need, because you're constantly being led in other directions. It's a better idea to, before you even start, give yourself a little bit of a plan. Okay, I'm going to use the internet sources, I'm going to use the library, I'm going to use interviews with my coworkers, whatever it is. Know how to locate necessary information. Make yourself some notes that give you an indication beforehand what's your plan of attack. You're going to look over here and look over there and look over there. You're going to look on Lexis, and you're going to look on you're going to just Google it. You're going to look on articles, libraries, whatever, and extract the information in an organized manner. Number three, evaluate the information. And evaluating the information means apply some sort of criteria to make sure that the information is reliable, valid, accurate, current, and free of bias. For example, you might say the information that I'm going to use has to come from a source, a newspaper that's generally considered reputable, like the Washington Post or the Chicago Tribune or something like that. It can't come from just an unconfirmed internet source, or you can say, for example, it can come from a random internet source, but it just can't come from a biased source. You might, for example, if you see something on a website, you might poke around the rest of the website to see if they're biased, or you might Google that particular website to see if other people are saying that they are reliable. So determine the credibility of the source, and then, of course, the usefulness of the information. Then you have the organization of the information, and this is where it's great to have some sort of an outline. Use systematic strategies to organize information in some sort of an outline, or at least in some sort of a structure at least. Put information in logical order. It could be chronologically. For example, if you're dealing with a history of something, it might be based on time. Usually, if you're dealing with just information that's relevant to a particular science, or then time probably doesn't matter very much. Priority of the elements of whatever you're researching, a problem solution, put it in some sort of an order and organize the information so that it's available for easy retrieval later on. For example, you might on your computer set up a certain file for a certain folder and put all the information in this particular folder. And finally, you have communicate the information. It has to be done effectively so it can be used to solve the problem or answer the question. If it's just to yourself, you don't have to communicate, but if you're presenting some sort of a report to your class or to your coworkers or to your supervisor or to your clients, your customers, you need to present it in a way that's effective for your audience. Choose the appropriate channel. Should it be written report? Should it be verbal, visual, electronic, or some sort of a combination? Should it be written as a narrative or a research report? In other words, are you telling a story, or you're writing a research report, or maybe a slide presentation? All of these could be effective ways to deliver the information depending on what the information is. The information should be referenced. In other words, the recipient should know where you got that information. You got that information from an article, from an encyclopedia, from a random web source. Nothing inherently wrong with using random web sources, but your audience should know that so that they can make their own evaluation. The research process and results should be evaluated to make sure that you completed whatever goal it was that you set out with to begin with. How do you get relevant information? Well, again, there could be many different sources. You can look at people that have faced similar issues, people that have thoroughly researched the topics. You could deal with experts in the area, ask them. You can go for books, encyclopedias, the internet. And one quick example, if you're planning on building a tree but you've never built one, well, you might ask your neighbor how he built his treehouse, or you can do some research in the library, you can Google it, you can go on the internet. All this is pretty basic stuff, and you're probably familiar with it anyway. The next chapter deals with getting information and determining the information you need. And the first step to determining the information is establishing research questions that are effective. In other words, research questions that are going to lead you to the answers that are going to solve your problem. So, effective research question includes key terms or relevant concepts, is not too broad or too narrow, it directs research appropriately, and it is objective. So, for example, if I'm trying to determine what kind of medication to take when I have a headache, an effective research question might be which pill has the data indicated is most effective for alleviating headaches, something like that. It would include terms like effective, headache, pill, medication. It shouldn't be too broad or too narrow. For example, a too broad statement might be, which pill's the best? Too narrow might be, which medication is effective in decreasing headache symptoms within 10 minutes? Because you're arbitrarily putting in a 10-minute characteristic which may not be that important. If it's 12 minutes, it might be good also. Excuse me. Examples of effective research questions. How did the Electoral College affect the outcome of the 2000 presidential election? It's very specific. It gives you a particular idea of what you're looking for. What effect would the introduction of certain enemy species to the area in which snakes reside have on their population? Which effect does divorce have on high academic achievement in high school students? All these things are specific. They contain the key terms of what you're looking for. They're not too broad and they're not too narrow. An ineffective research question might be, who was George Washington? It doesn't really tell you what you need to know. It's a very broad question, doesn't focus very well. Does the United States have a good foreign policy? Aside from the fact that it's extremely broad, it also doesn't really define good. It doesn't define what parameters. Do storms affect tigers? And what kinds of storms? What kind of tigers, for that matter? Affect in what way? Etc. Okay, what kinds of sources of information are you going to be looking for? Well, a primary source is a source that's closest to the actual event, time period, or individual or question. The information hasn't been edited, interpreted, or changed. Something that occurred at the time, at the moment, was spontaneous. A statement made by the president in an interview, a diary from a Civil War soldier, obviously it depends on what the question is. If you want to know what the president thinks on a subject, then what the president said obviously is a primary source. If you want to know about what life is like in the Civil War, a diary entry from a Civil War soldier would be a lot more of a primary entry, would be a lot more of a primary source than, let's say, the statement of a historian 100 years later. A historian might be very knowledgeable, but it's not as close to the action as somebody who was actually there. A secondary source is something that's removed from a primary source. This is sources of information that examine, interpret, or reference the primary sources. They're much more easily available. They're not necessarily quite as good as a primary source, but certainly they're available and they certainly can be used. A history textbook, a political commentary, an expert's opinions, those are all examples of secondary sources. In a library, and we discussed a little bit about this last chapter, you have various sources of information, including fiction. Now, fiction, believe it or not, is also considered a source of information. Even though they're usually for entertainment and not necessarily based on fact, sources that are fiction very often could have history involved. For example, a World War II novel might have a lot of facts regarding World War II involved, and it also may give you a feel for what life was like at that time. Certainly, novelists do a tremendous amount of research as to the subject matter of what they're writing about. They want to be as accurate as possible within the parameters of the world that they create. Nonfiction is information that is factual, or at least is presented as factual. Whether it actually is of course a different question. Reference sources in a library include, well, they could be found at a reference section, a reference desk. In today's day and age, very often they're computerized. Books, websites, encyclopedias, photos, atlases, things like that can be used as references. Certainly, you go to the reference section of the library, you have encyclopedias, dictionaries, atlases, etc. I think we all know what these things are, but they're defined over here. An encyclopedia is a collection of detailed articles on a wide range of topics. Encyclopedia Britannica, the World's Encyclopedia, then there's Wikipedia, which is really an online encyclopedia, and et cetera, et cetera. A dictionary is an alphabetical listing of words and definitions. I think we all realize that. A directory is a collection of data in an organized way that allows users to access the information easily. A telephone directory is probably the most common one that you think of on a day-to-day basis. An atlas is a collection of geographical and historical information, such as maps. The maps could be present, they could be historical, they could be military maps, war maps, things like that. And then there's an almanac. An almanac is a publication that provides statistics, lists, figures, tables, other specific facts, things like the facts about countries, facts about weather, facts about a million different things. If you just take out an almanac and look through it, you can find lots and lots and lots of information. Some of it useful, a lot of it probably useless, but still an interesting piece of information or source of information. A card catalog used to be a physical card, that's why it was called a card catalog. Today they are generally computerized. They're a computerized online catalog of all materials held in a library. They can be searched through quickly and efficiency. Most are Windows-based, and very often they have their online public access catalog available on the internet for their patrons. My local library, I can just go to the website, type in the author, type in the title, type in a reference number, type in pretty much anything I like, and it will give me all the books that match that criteria. In the old days, they probably still have card catalogs, although nobody uses them anymore, but they were physical cards that were listed by reference number or listed by author that you used if you wanted to find books in a particular area or by a particular author. There are also many other types of reference materials. Scholarly journals is one example, published by educational institutions or professional associations. For law, there are law reviews that are published by law schools. There are medical journals. There are scientific journals. There are all sorts of journals and I guess like publications, magazines, publications like Foreign Affairs, which is a magazine that has long scholarly articles about foreign policy issues. And the goal is to publish information to professionals and researchers. Lay people can also read these, but they're generally for other professionals, and they are often peer-reviewed by experts in that particular field. And what peer-reviewed means is that rather, as opposed to a newspaper where you just give it to your editor and the editor says okay and it's published, they're first circulated to other professionals in the community, and the other professionals in the community have the opportunity to review and comment on it. If they think that it's nonsense, they can say so, and it may never be published. If it only gets published if it has a certain level of respectability to the point where other people in the same area, in the same fields, might have at least some level of respect for it. So it makes them more valuable information than sources that were not peer-reviewed. Popular magazines and newspapers also provide information to the general public. The articles are usually much shorter, may not have any sources. Scholarly journals have to have their sources in them. A law review article might have 250 footnotes with all sorts of different citations, and other scholarly journals do the same thing. But a popular magazine does not necessarily have to have any references, and it can be about any topic like news, entertainment, leisure, home, self-improvement, health, etc. Then you have the internet. The internet is, well, we all pretty much know what the internet is. It's a high-speed electronic network that connects personal computers and organizational computer facilities around the world. The internet itself is just a connection between computers. The World Wide Web, which wasn't developed until the early to mid-90s, the internet itself, I think, was actually started in the late 60s, early 70s. But the World Wide Web, the thing that really made the internet what it is today, wasn't started until the 90s. And the World Wide Web is an international network of servers that allows everybody's computer essentially to be hooked up to whatever sources there are. In other words, in the old days, If you were on the internet like Prodigy or CompuServe in the late 80s or whatever it was, you had to go, you only got the information specifically that Prodigy gave you. You got the information specifically that you were hooked up to a particular computer or you were hooked up to a particular server. Whereas in the World Wide Web, we're all kind of hooked into the same basic central components that allow us to, you can put something up and everybody can see it. It kind of connects everyone. URLs used to all be www.whatever.com or whatever it was. Today, very often you also see it. Today, it's not as critical because it's pretty standardized. But it always used to be www because that stands for the World Wide Web. The idea is rather than this information being on a particular server or just one particular computer, this information is accessible to the world because it's on the World Wide Web. Search engines use computer software to make the World Wide Web searchable, like Google, Yahoo, Ask.com, all these different things, and they're designed to give the user the most relevant information to suit his or her needs based on the terms that the person searched. You can see on the bottom, as we just discussed, the Internet and the World Wide Web are not the same exact thing. The web's available over the Internet. It runs over the Internet, and it allows everybody to access the same central information. Okay, so what are some examples of various sources? Well, peer-reviewed scholarly journals, like law review articles, medical journals, etc., the information is very reliable because it's been peer-reviewed. Other people have looked at it and confirmed it, or it's been well-researched, well-sourced. Reliability is easy to confirm because they're well-sourced and well-referenced, and the fact that it's been peer-reviewed. A library card catalog could be online also. Once it's actually gone to the library, the information is relatively easy to find. The information is easily accessed because you can just go to the library. A librarian can help and confirm the reliability of different sources. What are some of the advantages of the internet? Well, it's easy. It's easy to find and easy to search through Google and search engines like that, and the information is generally very accessible. What are some of the downsides? Well, peer-reviewed scholarly journals, first of all, they're not so easily accessible. You may have to buy the publication or buy a subscription to the online version of the publication, and they're written in more technical language. They're sometimes harder to understand because they're written on a higher level. The problem with a library, first of all, you actually might have to go to the library. That's one possibility. And also some information will be reliable, but reliability is not guaranteed just because something's in a library. There are a lot of books in the library that have unreliable information. And the internet, of course, the downside is that although there are a lot of sources out there, you have to confirm the reliability of the sources. Anybody can post anything to the internet. It could be anonymously, it could say pretty much anything. And just because it appears on the internet does not mean it's true. You can't confirm the reliability of the sources so easily. You can't confirm who's making the assertion. So you do have to be very careful what information you can believe that you find over the internet. Chapter 3 deals with how to access information. And of course, the traditional way to access information has always been in a library. And we're going to discuss libraries, modern libraries, libraries that have multimedia and electronic communications as well. And of course, we are going to be discussing digital sources such as the internet. First, let's go through libraries. Libraries, of course, contain many modes of gathering information. The traditional mode is books, but it also has devices such as videos, audio CDs, tapes, DVDs, microfilm or microfiche. Not as common as it used to be because today things can be stored electronically, but certainly they still have little areas where you can go to these old machines. It can look like things that look like camera film, which is called microfilm, and that has stored data on it. Computers with internet access, and of course other forms of reference material. Then of course you also have digital libraries, which are essentially like websites that have various materials on it. So here are some examples or some of the differences between digital libraries and traditional libraries. Well, traditional libraries has information that you can't necessarily get online. Also, in a traditional library, there will be a person there that's a reference librarian that will help you find sources that you might need to find. If you're going to need help, this is especially beneficial. Online librarians require forms and have to wait a while before receiving a response. In other words, if you have an online librarian who will answer your questions by email, it's asynchronous. It doesn't happen right away. You might have to wait for an exchange of emails. Whereas if you have a person sitting there behind a reference desk, it's a little bit easier. Of course, there are some advantages as well of digital libraries, which are open 24/7, 365. It's open constantly. You don't have to wait until the library doesn't close at 5 o'clock in the afternoon or ever. It's open all the time. It can be accessed from anywhere as long as the computer has internet access. The library may have a uniform locator, in other words, a website with maybe an access code that will give you access to what is necessary. It can accommodate multiple users. More than one person can read the same source. As opposed to a book, if the library only has one copy of the book, you can only have one person reading it at a time. There's generally no fee, although of course that may vary from resource to resource. And traditional libraries also generally have no fee if you pay taxes in that jurisdiction. But the resources can be checked out for longer periods of time or may even have no limit. Sometimes libraries do have limits where they allow you to check out an ebook that's only good for a certain amount of time. Obviously, an ebook, if you're going to buy, generally you have to pay for it. If you want to borrow it, you may only have to use it for a much shorter period of time. And so now let's look at library classification systems. In other words, how do libraries know where to put books? Or I shouldn't say know where to put books, but how do you know where to find books in a library? And the Library of Congress has its own classification system that most libraries will follow, since that makes it uniform. And that way, if everybody uses the Library of Congress system, you can go into any library in the country and have essentially the same numbered system and the same overall system, and it will make things it'll make things much easier to find no matter where you are. It's made up of 21 broad categories, things like natural sciences, mathematics, history, whatever. And many libraries use this system to try to make sure that it's consistent with the National Library. And library classifications are very often done through the DDS, or the Dewey Decimal System. And that is that the topics themselves, those 21 topics that we saw before, are numbered from 0 essentially to 1,000. Each of the 10 categories is broken further down into progressively more precise subdivisions. In other words, instead of being 21, there is 10, the 1s and the 2s and the 3s, etc., and that breaks down further. And then whole numbers and decimals are used to classify subcategories and subcategories until you get the actual book. So for example, natural sciences and mathematics are in the 500, and so earth science would be 550. Now I don't know offhand what the actual numbers are for the other ones, but for example, biological sciences might be 560, and physical sciences might be 540. Something to that effect. That's really how these things work. Excuse me, how these things work. And the way you find an actual book is through the entire call number. And the call number each book will have its own call number. Now, they could be the call number in the Dewey Decimal System. This is an example of a Dewey number, the 398. Remember, it's a number between 1 and 1,000. And other types of books, usually the Dewey Decimal System is usually used for nonfiction books. For fictional books, they're often taken by the author. They're by the author's name. So you can have H994, which is a different system, not a Dewey system, the Cutter number, T823, again, just different systems of numbering books, and of course the date. And different books in the same category will have similar numbers. Searching for information can be in terms of fiction or nonfiction, really. In other words, the Dewey Decimal System will usually work with nonfiction, but let's say you want to find a particular book by a particular author or a particular title or subject matter, you can search by various characteristics. You can search by the author if you know the author's last name, by title, by subject matter, or, as you're used to in internet searches, by keyword. Keyword means, if you say, for example, earth science, so you may not only get earth science in the title, you get books about earth science because books are programmed in that with subjects that they're about. And one way in which these things operate is the Boolean system under something called Boolean operators. The Boolean system is based on the idea that one book may cover multiple subjects and multiple carriers. You can't really pigeonhole. For example, something that writes about Albert Einstein might be both a biography, it might be history, and it might be physical science. You can't necessarily put it into one neat little category. You can't put every book into one category. So what Boolean operators do, and this is true in many different contexts, but also in the library context, is that it's a form of keyword searching using or, and not. The AND system tries to bring up information that applies to both of two words. For example, amusement parks and entertainment will bring up information on both amusement parks and information. It especially might bring up books that cover both, that cover the entertainment involving amusement parks, but it will also cover things that are in either category. You can also do a Boolean search that's relevant to that has a not in there. A not specifically excludes a subcategory. If you say amusement parks and not entertainment, well then you're going to bring up books that are relevant to amusement parks but are specifically not based on entertainment. So a book that has a keyword entertainment would not show up on a Boolean search that's for amusement parks but not entertainment. And of course, this is useful for saving time if you're looking for a category that's dominated by a different subcategory that you're just not interested in. And you can also use or. Or is where you run a search that you can search multiple categories at the same time. Theater or theater over here. They sometimes use with two words with different spellings. This theater is with the American spelling. Theater with an RE at the end is more like the British spelling. And if you're looking for books that are about theater in general and you're not sure how to spell it, so you can run or how the book that you're looking for is going to spell it, you might use an or search to find books that are relevant to either one. And of course, more than one of the words can be put into a search as well. This is an example of how Boolean operators work. These are, you may recognize these are Venn diagrams. Venn diagrams are when you have multiple categories that have parts that intersect, that have parts that that combine. Just if you look at an and or search at the top over here, let's say you have theater, and entertainment. These are different categories. In other words, you might have books that have a keyword theater with an RE. You might have books with a keyword theater with an ER, and you might have books with entertainment as a keyword. So if you're looking for something that has either theater with an ER or theater with an RE, you'll get each of these two circles. In other words, you'll get all the books that represent this circle because they have theater with an ER in their keyword, and you'll get all the books that have RE because they have theater with an RE at the end of the word. So you'll get, if you do an or theater, you'd get all of these books in both circles. If you search theater and entertainment, well then you'd only get this little sliver over here. You'd only get something that has both theater and entertainment. So if you want a big number of results, you try an or, because now you're getting either one. Whereas if you want only a small number of results, because you're trying to be as specific as possible, then you might run an and search, because an and will restrict it and will only give you books that have both theater and entertainment. So it'll only give you results that come in the middle. If you want theater and entertainment, you'd get these two circles, which is probably a pretty smart way of doing it. Amusement parks and entertainment, if you did that, you'd only get books that have both amusement parks and entertainment in their search terms. Books that only have entertainment in their search terms and not amusement parks would be in here. Books that only have amusement parks and not entertainment would be here, and you would only get, if you do and, you'd only get in the middle. So you'd get a much more limited number of results. This is an example of theater or theater. You'd get both circles, and if you do amusement parks but not entertainment, then you would get over here, because this has amusement parks and not entertainment in the search terms, but you would not get what's in the middle over here because this has both entertainment and amusement parks. Again, it's really just the same idea as a Venn diagram. Indexes, which are relevant to help find information, are alphabetical lists that can find information within a source. Index very often apply in the back of books or encyclopedias or whatever it is. You have book indexes that are in the back of the book, and in a multi-volume set, like an encyclopedia or a big book on a particular subject, you may have an index for each volume, or you can have an entire volume just as an index for that subject, or one index that applies to the entire volume. In other words, you could have any of these things. So what an index is, it's basically a list of categories in the back, and then you can go through each category and make a determination of what's relevant to you. You can also have a periodical index, which is a cumulative list of all articles from a set of periodicals, like a law review or a newspaper or magazine, all the subscriptions, all the issues from the last year. You can have an index that covers all the subjects that were covered that year. They can be arranged in alphabetical order by author, title, or subject. Now, how do you actually collect the information once you find it? Well, there are lots of good ways to do it. You probably won't be able to read the entire book or the entire article of every relevant source you find. So the first thing you might have to do is scan and skim, which means look over things quickly to make a quick determination of whether they're worth reading them more carefully. So scanning and skimming is a technique for researchers who are exploring specific information. Scanning means you go through the material quickly to see if it contains the relevant material. It could be done with your eyes, like in the old days, or it could be done with a Control F, on the computer to see if it has a particular word that you're looking for, or idea or specific information. Skimming is a similar idea, where you just read it over very quickly, read over certain sentences here and there to try to find maybe the first sentences of each paragraph or the first sentence of each section to see if it discusses what's relevant to you, and then you could know whether to continue reading it in more detail. Highlighting means marking important words, phrases, or passages for future references. You can do it with a highlighter, or you can do it electronically, of course. Then you also have note-taking. Note-taking is a technique used to organize and abbreviate highlighted materials. The facts can be paraphrased or rephrased, not necessarily copied. If you copy it, you're not really helping yourself because you're just going to have to read read it again. If you copy and paste it into your notes, then what time have you really helped? So note-taking is when you just write specific notes on the sources that you're looking for. So you want to make sure to be able to do that because that helps you go through something and then you can come back later and look at it more carefully, but maybe you'll take such good notes that you won't have to come back and look at it and you'll have the information that you need. It can help you save time. As you're going through a big book of information, just quickly taking notes might help jog your memory to what was important. Plagiarism, something we'll discuss more later on, means presenting someone else's ideas as your own, which you don't want to do. Instead, if you're quoting from somebody, if you're quoting from an encyclopedia or any book, you have to specifically reference the original source for that information, and we'll get to plagiarism a little bit later on in more detail. Okay, now that we have discussed information gathering, it's a time to discuss how to evaluate that information. How do we make a determination of what information is usable, what information is reliable, and what information has to be taken with a grain of salt or not used at all? Excuse me. Okay, there we go. Here's our first slide. Most of evaluating information, is based in common sense. Whether a person has an axe to grind, or whether information makes sense, or whether it's in a source that is reliable, is very often a matter of common sense, but it's still important to understand how information is published and communicated. First step is, when was it published? That influences the content and defines how the information can be used effectively. Some subjects, it doesn't really matter when it was published. If it's how to do an algebra problem, well, algebra hasn't changed much in the last couple of thousand years since it was originally discovered. Whereas something like politics, if you're looking for information on the President of the United States and you're looking at something from 2007, well, it's going to be a different person than it is today. So things that are some areas need much more time sensitive, need much more time sensitive information. Two different types of data are qualitative data, describes the characteristics and observations of something, which an example of that would be 500 people feel better after taking vitamin C for 2 months. Qualitative data, in other words, indicates a judgment, a result, something other than numbers. If I just said, for example, 500 people took vitamin C for 2 months, that would be the other type of data, quantitative data. Quantitative data means just an amount. something that happened. Qualitative data means something more than just a number, something more than just a statistic, something that represents some sort of judgment or conclusion. So 500 people took vitamin C for 2 months, that's quantitative. 500 people feel better after taking vitamin C for 2 months, that is qualitative. Quantitative data measures something, that 1,000 people ran a marathon. That, of course, is quantitative. If I wanted to turn that into qualitative data, I would say 1,000 people felt very tired after they took the marathon. Um, and of course, a piece of information can and usually does, in fact, have both types of data. Okay, now in terms of evaluating information, of course, we have to look at the source. Now, we're going to discuss various sources that are relevant over here, and probably the most reliable source you can get, especially in an academic context, is a scholarly journal. A scholarly journal is something that is published by experts in the field or by schools in the field, and it's designed to have specific academic information. It's written by authorities in the topic area or field. It might be somebody in industry, it might be a professor, it might be somebody who's an expert in that particular field, and it includes research reports and other factual information, and it's the most reliable source compared to other journals, magazines, things like that. And the reason why, as we discussed earlier, is that it is usually peer-reviewed, which means other people, other experts in the area, will review it and make comments on it. If it comes out in a scholarly journal, other reviewers might make comments on it, whether good or bad. And if it's bad, it might fall into disrespect. It might, not have the same academic standing. And it usually contains an introductory article. And when I say article, usually, a 1 or 2 page summary, an abstract, that they say, where you're just kind of telling the reader what's going on in the paper, the highlights, the bullet points, and that's very useful because you can just read the abstract, you can read the introductory article, which might be 1 or 2 pages long, and make a determination of whether it pays to read the other 50 pages. So the thesis statement tells the reader what the article is about, and in scientific studies, the hypothesis, which is what, in other words, when you experimented on something, and your report is to try to determine what the conclusion was. So the hypothesis, which was your original educated guess as to what would happen, would replace the thesis statement. In fact, you can see in the word hypothesis, obviously you can see the word thesis in there. Other types of sources include trade journals, journals and magazines, trade publications, things like Popular Mechanics, and just things that are respected within their own industries. Maybe the New York Law Journal, the New England Journal of Medicine. These are all things that are trade journals. They may not necessarily have the same level of scholarly. They're not really articles that are scholarly journals, but at least they're periodicals that are specifically meant for audiences in this area. They have to be viewed critically for accuracy and credibility and appropriateness, but they have certainly a certain level of credibility, more so than other newspapers and magazines. Authors are usually specialists or practitioners in the field, and most of the information is practical, which means that it's primarily for other people in the trade trying to help people do whatever best practice is relevant to that trade, whether it's medicine or law or whatever. Now, there's no peer review process in a journal or magazine, which makes it, not as good as a scholarly journal for that purpose. Popular magazines like Newsweek, Time, Sports Illustrated, whatever it is, their purpose is to entertain and not necessarily to inform, and therefore they're a less credible source. And the language, of course, is not so technical because it's written for the general public. It's not necessarily a bad source of information, but certainly you cannot take it as face value as much as you would a scholarly journal, or even as much as you would a trade publication. What about online sources? Random information you find on the internet. Well, there you got to take everything with kind of a grain of salt, and you have to do, I guess, kind of your own vetting process. Your own process to try to make sure that what you're reading is reliable. You want to identify the reliability of the author. What are the author's credentials? Does this author have credentials that make the author reliable in this area? Why was the article written? What's the author's experience? Is the author writing a medical journal on WebMD? Is that person a doctor, or is that person just somebody who happens to have taking care of people with no credentials whatsoever. Or just thinks that they know their stuff and they really don't. What's the author's affiliation? Are they hired by a particular company and are they touting that particular company's drugs or services? Is there bias there, which is very important to see that. Is there an about the author paragraph or a way to contact the author? Something that's anonymous, that doesn't have any author, or it doesn't have any author listed, is particularly low in terms of credibility because the author isn't even putting his or her name out there on the line. The author is just throwing out the information and not backing it whatsoever. Who's the publisher? Who actually publishes? In other words, who owns the website? Is it a not-for-profit organization or a government entity, or is it somebody that's for-profit trying to hawk a particular product or a particular company? Is this an academic print, which tends to be highly reputable? These are all things you got to ask before you use that information as being authoritative. Who's the owner? A URL ending in .com or .org or .net or anything like that can pretty much be written by anybody. .edu at least signifies an educational institution, an accredited school, and .gov signifies a government-sponsored website, so it's likely to be a little bit more credible than a .com or a .org website, although again, just because it's on a .edu or .gov website doesn't inherently mean that it's true. You still have to vet it in these other ways as well. Of course, the reliability of the internet generally has some problems. First of all, for many reasons. Difficulty in determining who the author is. Even if the author does put a name there, there's no guarantee that that really is the author. And there's no guarantee that the information about the author is accurate. The author may have bias. The instability of the website in which it's hosted. Websites are constantly changing. It can be edited, it can be hacked, it can be edited by whoever has access to the back room of the website. Wikipedia is an example. Wikipedia is a great online encyclopedia. I use it a lot. But the thing is that they're not 100% reliable because authors can easily change it. Now, of course, there are other editors that try to make sure that people don't make bad changes. But still, Wikipedia is a great source of information for amusement or to start on something. But I wouldn't use it as a primary source. In other words, if you're gonna say, well, I know in a journal or for an important purpose, academic or business or whatever it is, you can use Wikipedia to get the information, but before you assume that it's true or before you present it as being true, you should definitely source it and try to find the original source other than just a Wikipedia article. Verifiable information. So information which is verifiable will appear in another credible source. If you can just find it in one source, it may not be verifiable. That means you cannot prove that it's true. If you can find it in the original source, maybe it could be a little easier. So one might be able to verify information on allergies from a government website. If you find something on Wikipedia about allergies, you might be able to find the same information either through the footnotes on Wikipedia or through a different search on a little bit of a more reputable search. And of course, you need to have accurate information because you want to make sure that the information you have appears in other credible sources so that they can be considered accurate. Multimedia presentations include graphics, video and audio resources, clip art, photos, animations. All of these things, obviously, they're just ways in which information is delivered. The fact that something's a PowerPoint presentation or a video does not make it any more likely to be true than if it's in print, or less likely to be true than if it's in print. So you have to evaluate it critically, just like print and online sources. You have to evaluate, if you see a video on YouTube, for example, or something on Prezi or whatever it is, you have to evaluate it the same way. The resource itself, the authority, the currency, the content. The advantages of multimedia presentation, like videos, is that it's easily accessible, whereas the disadvantage, again, just like other internet resources, is that you need to very carefully verify it and make sure that the information is credible. So now we've got the information, we have verified the information. The next step is organizing the information. How do you put the information together in a way that it can be presented, in a way that it can be utilized? Well, first thing is, you can organize it by category or by concept. Separate ideas that combine to produce a concept should be understood individually before their synthesis, which means combining two different ideas to make a third idea, makes sense. For example, if you're doing a presentation on the economic impacts on a country of capitalism, well, first you need data on what countries have used capitalism and to what extent in the last X number of years, and then you can get information about those countries' economies and how they've done over the next X number of years, organize them, and then you can once you understand the two components, you can synthesize the two into one theory or one thesis or whatever it is. You can also organize information by time, chronological organization, which may be appropriate, for example, if you're doing history. It may not be so appropriate if you're doing something in mathematics. If mathematics really makes no difference when when the information was discovered or when the equation was done. So really, whether organizing things chronologically makes sense really depends on the subject matter. You can organize it by alphabetizing it, dictionaries, telephone directories, things like that. And of course, you can also use hierarchical organizations if things are best conveyed in a specific order. Hierarchical means least important to most important, or least to most complex, or the opposite. In most, you're presenting information that is building to importance, or you're presenting the most important information first and tapering off. So there's no right or wrong way to do it. These are just simply different ways in which they may be appropriate in various areas. Organizing written documents are also important: proposals, reports, assessments, other documents, etc. And there are various ways to organize and catalog things. For example, binders, physical binders. Documents can be stored in one form, like a loose leaf. The disadvantage, of course, for a physical binder is that it's more difficult in full document form to actually move papers around and organize them as appropriate. So therefore, what people very often do is they use electronic folders, things on your computer, things you can move. You can have folders on your computer where you move various documents. In other words, you organize them by research area, you organize them by whether you're going to use them, and you can organize them on your own computer. And of course, the only disadvantage is that it requires the electronic system, and internet access will be required. But in today's day and age, that of course is becoming less and less of a problem because it's easier and easier to access the internet from pretty much everywhere. You can use individual file folders. Again, you can keep things. You can have a separate file for each piece of information. Personally, I think that's a pretty silly way to organize things. You're going to have a lot of different pieces of information that are going to have to be organized. So I would recommend personally using the electronic folders. You can also use visual organizers. Maybe something like a whiteboard in your office where you put a list of whatever information you're using to the right and to the left. Okay. Now here, this is an example of simple to complex organization. The truth is this is really Bloom's taxonomy that we discussed before. Knowledge provides facts and figures. Comprehension compares, summarizes, and shows an understanding of the concept. These are from the lowest level of complexity to the highest level of complexity. Application relates an example to the rules. Analysis breaks a concept down into its components. Synthesis creates a new idea, whereas evaluation makes a judgment as to the appropriateness and effectiveness of the concept. Okay, so let's take a look next in terms of writing itself. Writing and presenting is what we're going to cover in the rest of the chapter. There are various writing styles. There's the MLA, the Modern Language Association. There's the American Psychological Association, the APA, Chicago style. These are all really just ways to cite things and ways to kind of styles. They don't really affect content that much. It doesn't really. These are all. When you take English, if you take our English course, you'll learn all about the Modern Language Association style and how to cite things properly and how to organize things properly. These are just different ways in which papers, articles, things like that are organized. Again, for this course, you don't have to know how to actually do them, but you should definitely at least know that they exist. In terms of organizing your presentation, obviously that also depends on the method of your presentation. If it's writing, first thing you need to do is follow a writing style. It could be APA, it could be MLA, it could be Chicago, but whatever you follow, you should learn that organization and follow that specific way of citing things. Use appropriate language and level of complexity for the given audience. Ensure that if you're writing to lay people, you don't write it in such technical language that they don't understand. On the other hand, if you're writing to people who are members of a profession, you can use technical jargon that's a little bit more complex. follow conventional language, spelling, and grammatical standards. If your paper has typos or has grammatical errors, then that could cause people to take it less seriously. And you should generally try to organize things from simple to complex to allow people to understand what's going on early and slowly build up. If you're teaching someone how to drive a car, first you tell them basic information about car, like how to adjust the mirrors, things like that, before teaching them how to actually, make sure that you're not speeding and driving safely, etc. Check your information for accuracy, and clear graphics should be used for clarity and enhancement of the documents. Other ways in which you present information could include things like graphics. Graphics should be appropriate for the document or presentation and should be clear or understandable and should convey an accurate message. Graphics, charts, pictures, cartoons, these are all things that very often can supplement a method by which you're communicating information, and they can be very effective. This is just one example over here, a bar chart. A bar chart has, for example, you have quantity A in the bottom and numbers quantity on the side, and you have different series that have, based on, again, they could be time periods, they could be drugs that are administered, it could be virtually any kind of quantity, but this is an example of a bar chart, and it clearly shows that under category A, series 1 did the highest, whatever that means, on series 2, on category B, Series 2 did the highest, Category 3 it looks like A edged out B, etc. So that's an example of a bar chart. Here's an example of a line graph which can convey similar information, except that instead of having a bar chart where things go up in stages, it's just kind of a line to determine what happens. I think this actually might be the same data as what we saw before. No, actually maybe not. But anyway, this is a pie chart. Now, a pie chart can only be used when you're talking about a percentage. Usually you have 100% of something, whatever that 100% is. Time people spend, in their day. One area will be work, one area will be sleep, one area will be playing, and you divide up the chart. And here, I guess this might be a sales chart in 4 quarters. So this company did 58% of its sales in the first quarter, 23% in the second quarter, and 10% in the third quarter, and 9% in the fourth quarter, and that had better add up to 100%. Let's see, 58 plus 23 is 81. Yeah, okay, so that adds up to 100%, thankfully. This is a scatter plot chart, a scatter chart, where you have y values and that's it, just plain y values. This, I guess, is a y values chart. So again, I don't know what these quantities are. Maybe it's number of, I don't know, colds per year or something, I don't know. But the thing is, so you have different numbers on the sides of the chart, and this is just wherever the data is. So at one quantity, at a little over one quantity, there was 1.5, whatever these things measure. Again, it's just an example of a scatter chart. This is an example of an area chart that also shows how much certain things covered. It's really the same kind of idea. These are all just different ways of different graphics and charts. Other ways in which things can be presented are, for example, PowerPoint presentations. PowerPoint offers opportunities to create impressive and sophisticated presentations. Now, there are a couple of things that you should keep in mind when creating PowerPoints. Number one, colors should be selected thoughtfully. There should be a contrast, like white text on dark blue is good for business-related presentations, whereas dark yellow on light yellow is barely legible, and people won't be able to read what you're talking about. Use legible fonts like Arial or Times New Roman. I mean, there are some others, but certainly you don't want to use things that look weird. Like calligraphy may be great for a wedding invitation, but it's not so great for a business presentation. And of course, present information clearly and concisely. Being concise, in other words, being short, is one of the things that PowerPoint really gives you the opportunity to do, because PowerPoint could be meant to accompany a verbal presentation. So you're standing up there in front of a room, you don't have to write everything on the slide. On the contrary, you don't want to write everything on the slide because you want the reader to focus on what you're saying rather than reading the slide the whole time. So that's important. There's also proposals and grants. Proposals and grants, of course, are very important when you're trying to get money or when you're trying to get a loan or when you're trying to do some business with somebody. Proposals are typically written to suggest a program or action to a company or to a school or whatever. A grant is written to obtain funding from the government or from a scholarship fund for a particular research or project, and these should have a summary of what you're asking for, an introduction which describes the background, a statement of the problem or purpose that it is that you're trying to solve with this plan of action, objectives and explanations for them. Okay, what are you trying to do? What do you need the money? What are you going to use? And well, well, just the objectives. What are your goals? But then you have the action plan. The action plan is okay, fine. What are you going to use the money for? I'm going to use, $1,000 to rent an office, and I'm going to use $50,000 to pay a new employee, etc. And then an evaluation of an explanation of why it's a good idea, not just what you're going to do with the money, but why it's a good idea for them to give you the money, what they're going to gain out of it in the long run. Finally, we have technical reports. Technical reports are common in the workplace and are used to communicate the result of a project or research. A sales report, a report that indicates to your supervisor or to whomever is in charge what's been happening with the project, how has it been going, has it been working. Some elements are there: title, of course, information of an author; abstract, a thorough overview of what's happened in the report, like kind of a one-page summary that somebody can read and get kind of the gist of what's going on. Then you want keyword, which are the keywords, which are the parameters of the report. What are the elements of it? Body of the report contains all the relevant information. Acknowledgments, in other words, who helped in the project, who helped prepare the report. References, where did you get the information that you presented. And appendices, if you want to attach additional reports or additional documents to it that support the report, but you didn't want to put all the language in the report itself because you just didn't think it was necessary to read the whole thing while reading the reports. But appendices can be very important in many subjects where you want the reader to have access to certain information, but you don't really think it's necessary, and you think it might be distracting or time-consuming to read it while reading the report itself. Our last chapter in the textbook is about ethical and legal communication and making sure that everything you do is legal, ethical, and appropriate when it comes to communicating information. And there are a few things that we are going to discuss regarding ethical and legal communication. First thing is intellectual property. We'll discuss that more on the next slide, but we want to make sure to respect intellectual property rights. In other words, if somebody else has a copyright or somebody else has a trademark on something, we don't want to use that in a way that violates the law or violates anybody else's intellectual property rights. There's also industrial property, which is created in the line of conducting business. An example of intellectual property that is industrial would be, let's say, the Coca-Cola recipe or the formula that makes various drugs. An invention, which is also something that is categorized by intellectual property, is an idea or concept that is new, useful, and not obvious. The intellectual property rights that are protected under American law include a patent, which is the protection of an invention, and it gives exclusive right to the inventor to develop and sell the invention for a particular period of time. Patents, I think, today last for 20 years. So if there's an invention, you are not allowed to copy that invention until the patent expires. There's a trademark. A trademark is legal protection of a logo, business name, symbol, or some other identifying element. Something, the swoosh on a Nike shoe. And it could be words like Kleenex for tissues, something like that, where it identifies a particular commercial product. It identifies a particular company. And using that when you're not associated with the company is, of course, illegal and subjects the person to lawsuits. Copyrights protect other forms of intellectual property, such as literary works, artwork, music, audio-video productions, etc. And copyrights reflect the rights given to creators in some forms of expression and intellectual property. Where this really comes in our course is, of course, whenever you write something and pass it off on your own in your own paper, you have to make sure that you're not violating copyrights. And these things, original music, original books, original articles, etc., are all protected by copyright laws, and they cover all reproduction in the work in any way. As we'll see, there's a major exception that we'll cover a little bit later on, but generally speaking, if I create a work, a piece of music, an article, whatever, nobody else is allowed to copy that without my permission. They are ideas are not copyrighted. It has to be something that's put actually in form, whether in an article, again in a music piece, whatever it is. The copyright symbol is a C with a circle, the circle around it. Now that doesn't mean that something is not protected by copyright if it doesn't have the C. And you can register a copyright, but that's not with the Library of Congress, but that's not necessary for something to be copyright protected. It's copyright protected whether you register it or not, or whether you put the Control C or not, but people put that in as a way to ensure that other people know that they're not allowed to use it. When the copyright expires after a certain number of years, it's something like 75 years or a certain number of years plus the life of the author, and then it goes into the public domain and anybody can use it. There is the big exception that's relevant to our purposes is fair use. Fair use, which is section 107, I believe, of the copyright rules, say that in some cases you can use and copy distributed copyrighted materials without permission. Usually that has to do with reviewing. If you're doing a book review, you're allowed to copy portions of the book in order to review them for educational purposes, and etc. You are allowed to use them for certain purposes. Like there are some caveats. It depends. Like for example, you can't really use the whole work, but you can use part of the work. These are all things that are relevant to copyrights. Our next issue, very important, very kind of relevant to copyrights, is the issue of plagiarism. And plagiarism is the idea of not copying somebody else's work without proper attribution, without quoting the original source and citing the original source. If you're using information given to you by somebody, that's okay, as long as you tell the reader where the information came from and use quotes around that piece of information. So that's what plagiarism is. It's using someone else's work without acknowledging the author, and the work has to be attributed to the source. Some ways to avoid plagiarism include using the exact words. If you put it in quotes and say, well, Joe Smith says, and then you put it in quotes, and then you say on the bottom in a footnote, this is Joe Smith's article in this particular area, that's fine. You can also paraphrase it, but again, even paraphrasing means restating someone else's words in your own words, but still what you should do is you should say where you got the idea from if you got the idea from somebody else. You can also use plagiarism detection software. For example, if you're about to submit a report and you used some other sources and you want to see if there's anybody else that said the same thing that you said, you can use specially designed plagiarism detection software to try to make sure that you're not plagiarizing. Things like Turnitin.com are used by educational institutions to try to make sure that you're not plagiarizing anything, and of course if somebody else gives something to you, you also want to make sure that it's not plagiarized. You can also summarize, which is similar to paraphrasing, but condensing someone else's work. But again, if you're paraphrasing or summarizing, you should make sure at least to say where you got the idea from. Save your work. Of course, keep your draft work in separate files. Don't allow other people to access your computer files who can adjust things or take your information. And taking effective notes. This will help you keep track of which ideas are yours and which ideas are others. As long as the ideas are others and you want to use them, that's okay, as long as you cite the sources. And clearly label each source on the page of notes. If you have some kind of a quote in your notes, make sure to make a little note as to where you got that quote from, and you should be okay. And then we're going to move to privacy and security. Well, privacy, of course, means keeping private information out of public view or access. Now, there are many different rules that try to help with privacy. One example is HIPAA, the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act, which protects your medical information, which says that a doctor or hospital cannot disclose your medical records without permission. There's also the Privacy Act of 1974, which provides other rights regarding individual people's privacy. But again, just because there are privacy rules, don't assume that other people can't use information. If you put information into the public domain, you put it up on the internet, you post it on Facebook, you give it to people, at least you can assume that other people might use it. Then there's computer security. Obviously, computer security is very important in today's digital age, and there are some important things that you can do to protect your computer from unwarranted or undesired intrusions by other people. And you can maintain current security protection like antivirus like Norton or McAfee or AVG or Trend Micro. These are all things that try to make sure that viruses and other malware don't infect your computer. Use safe email procedures. Don't leave your password that's exposed that somebody else can take. Protect the consumer when using wireless technology and secure the computer from hackers who try to tap into your wireless network. Keeping your wireless network under password and under appropriate security is very important for you and for all the people who use your network. Don't violate copyright or privacy rules, and of course, don't send spam. Spam means email that is unwarranted, selling products or, sending whatever message you like that is not appreciated and not wanted by the email recipient. And of course, never send or make available obscene, vulgar, derogatory, discriminatory, or slanderous material, which could be illegal and certainly can be unethical. Safe and ethical networking, not tapping into other people's networks when you're not supposed to, using secure passwords to make sure people don't get your password and therefore access to your private information, backing up your files so that if something does get destroyed, you don't lose it, being aware of internet scams. Any activity when someone tries to sell you products fraudulently or intends to get you to invest in illegal or non-existent projects, there are lots and lots of scams out there. People try these 419 scams where they try to get you money. They pretend that they have this big business venture that you're gonna get millions of dollars if you cooperate with them. There are all sorts of different scams that you want to make sure to try to avoid. And don't use work computer for personal use, like in business and schools, because that information can be viewed by administrators, people who are involved in the network, and that's probably the sort of thing that you probably don't want. Communication with other people can be done, of course, in many different ways. You all know this already, but we can just go through this very quickly. Examples of written communications include emails, memoranda, proposals, online chats, and oral communication can be done with face-to-face conversation, webinars, which are like seminars on the internet, and telephone conversations. Written communication, of course, has its advantages in terms of when you want feedback from the listener. Is the listener frowning? Is the listener grimacing when you're talking? When you're talking on the phone, you don't have quite the same level of feedback. Visual, tangible feedback can help you adjust your message that's tailored to the listener. Oral communication is, of course, most common in the workplace. Visual communication certainly can be used with PowerPoint presentations, drawings, diagrams, images. These are very useful for people who are visual learners who like to see things in front of them in terms of diagram, bullet points, statements, PowerPoints when they're being discussed.